Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. If you enjoy these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and follow this podcast on Instagram. If these episodes have been impactful for you, or you know someone that would benefit from one of these episodes, please feel free to share it with a friend. Your support means the world to me. Thanks so much for being here. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Tara Myers. She is a therapist who specializes in treating individuals suffering from severe disorders, including borderline personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, often with high risk of suicide. She became a therapist after decades of suffering due to untreated BPD and PTSD, but still had lingering depression. Remembering her love for the woods close to the Delaware Water Gap as a child, she began summiting peaks in California, and then backpacking and finally facing her intense fear of heights and rock climbing. It was in the mountains that she heard God speak to her after decades of rejecting Him because of a very traumatic childhood followed by severe traumatic events, including a direct threat to her life at 15. Thanks so much for being with us today, Tara.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I just read your bio, but why don't you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and who you are?
So I was raised in New Jersey, Jersey girl. I think I'm going to go more into that, but I definitely had a traumatic childhood, foster homes, and moving around a lot. And, spent pretty much decades kind of getting to where I am. And now, like I said, I'd probably get into that. I had pretty severe mental health issues and not really any family. And, at least the family I did have a lot of drug addiction and just not all around very supportive. And so I dropped out of high school not even high school, 8th grade. And later on, I joined the Army and became a therapist. It kind of, and now I'm a therapist. I got a master's degree 13 years ago. So when I was 40, so later in life, and I began being a therapist, and I specialize in a very specific type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And after realizing that quote unquote normal therapy wasn't working for the people because it never worked for me, and normal therapy kind of just being nice, shaking your head, warm, empathetic. It really, that alone is nice. It feels good, but it doesn't change. You can't really change really severe issues. And so it's kind of finding a balance of being able to help someone change and push them to change, but also make them feel like they're a worthy human being as is. And so that's how I got drawn to that type of therapy. So I went from like non-change oriented to very change oriented. And it kind of became like a second master's degree. It was very hard to learn. And then I became the first board certified in Southern California. And that was a really big deal for me because I don't think I was ever first in anything. So I was like, yes, I was the one. But so I started my own practice. I realized it was pretty interesting after having problems working for people. I'm just kind of I call myself a lone wolf and stuff. And my husband was like one day, like, just start your own practice. Like, you're just going to always have these problems. Like, you're kind of bullheaded. And I started my own practice, worked really, really hard. I got really out of shape. And at that point I was, I had liked working out and things like that. And so I became just a workaholic. And then I realized I was really unhappy when I got everything I want, family, a home, and things like that. And in true me fashion, I happened to see like a group hike for Cucamonga. Cucamonga Peak is in California. I ended up going on that, and it didn't work out. It was too big of a group, but I went back my next week with my husband, and I was completely out of shape. I was like, my asthma, and like it took forever, but I got to the summit, and I never been to a California summit, and we were above the clouds, and that really, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it motivated me to change. And I went from completely out of shape to I'm going to summit Whitney next year. And I did with an injury because I was so gung ho on getting on shape because I wanted to be able to do these mountains. And so it was a pretty miserable experience, but I still did it. So funny side note, I had to because I already got a tattoo on my arm of it. So it was like I was thinking of this story about, well, I was going to, and that didn't sit well with me. I was like, so I'll crawl up Whitney, I'll get there. And that's kind of changed my life, like completely. Like I don't know if I lost friends, but we just kind of moved along because they're like, who is this person? Like, it was a radical change. And, and then I began, I backpacking, I did some solo backpacking, and I decided to do some 14ers in the Palisades, which in the Sierra, and there was some rock climbing involved. And at that point I was kind of afraid of everything height related. And, actually, I think I had just started exposing. I did roller coaster exposure therapy. I just kept going on harder and harder, like scarier ones. But I was terrified, so I rappelled at 14,000 feet. I only did one of the peaks because it was very ambitious for somebody with no climbing. I climbed once outdoors. That was it. So there was another peak next to it, and that motivated me. I was like, I'm going to train all year so I can summit that one next year. And I joined a rock climbing gym. I went outdoors. I did a bunch of multi-pitch, and the next year I summited that peak. And, then everything, it keeps progressing. I only did like top rope climbing. Now I lead. It's still kind of scary to me sometimes, but, so now my whole life is trying to fit climbing and hiking, which sometimes is really nifty. Like if you go on a Sierra, like last year I rock climbed Mount Whitney, so you have to hike up to get there. So I really like the alpine climbs because you have I backpacked, spent the night, woke up and, climbed. So it was nice putting them all together. So my whole life has revolved around staying fit. I'm 53, so I'm not a spring chicken to be starting these things. So I strength train and a bunch of stuff so that I can do these for as long as possible. So, I try to balance time with family, and now I have a bunch of furry babies, and that's pretty much my life. I still work, but that's kind of like not my, it's kind of something that is part of my life as a means to an end. And I enjoy it, but it's not the only thing, important to me. And I've also learned how to set limits. Like if someone calls and they want to come in at 6 p.m., it used to be really hard for me to say, no. And now I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm not working till 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But that's pretty much me. I know I just kind of jumbled a bunch of things together, but yeah.
Yeah. Ex-workaholic, kind of, did all the things you thought you wanted to do and were still unfulfilled, and then kind of have found some fulfillment in the outdoors. I think that's beautiful. And I think that it's so cool that you got into a lot of these hobbies as a, older adult, being in your 40s or when you were 40. I think that, a lot of times I don't see a lot of 40-year-olds starting new hobbies or trying new things. And so I think that's really cool that you did that, because it obviously sounds like it's changed your life in a really positive way. And she also, y'all, for those listening, Tara just completed the JMT, which I did as well. And so we met at Highlander, last year in Montana. Yeah. And actually at one point talked about maybe doing the JMT together, but she just did that as well. So just completed, what was it for you? 230 230
30,
miles.
yeah.
Yeah, 230 miles on the John Muir Trail. So that's a huge epic accomplishment for anybody, but I think it's really cool. Like, I felt like it was really hard. And so I'm like, kudos to you for doing it, being a little bit older than I am, because that seems a little crazy to me. Me and Meg were talking while we were out there about how many, there was like, I feel like a lot of people that we saw were in their like 60s and 70s. And I was like, that is insane to me that, that these people are out here doing it. But I also get it because they're probably retired. And this has been a pipe dream for a long time that they couldn't do, having a career. So it's cool being able to work for yourself and getting to do these kinds of things and kind of making your own schedule in a way. So kind of, you said you hike, you backpack, you rock climb. Which one is your favorite if you had to choose?
I actually thought of this when I scheduled the meeting with you, and that's actually really tricky. They're very different. So rock climbing is, today I went actually this morning, with 5 people. I like talking and interacting with people. So, I could boulder alone, but I don't do that. So it's something I do with people. Whereas I do hike with people. It's usually like one other person. Though I'm not a group. Get really stressed out around a lot of people, like noises and stuff, and it's just not my cup of tea. Like, I can appreciate we're all different, and so hiking sometimes is, if I need to clear my head, it's a hike. Or my mother passed away in 2019, and I was supposed to do the Trans Catalina Trail solo, and I was a mess. But the night before, I was like, literally the night before I had like tickets and everything, I said to my husband, I said, I actually think I need to do this, which of course, so I'm getting no sleep packing for this trip last minute. And that was like the best thing for grief, was doing the Trans Catalina Trail alone. And then I did it the next year, kind of as an anniversary of the first time, and of her death. So I don't always like solo, but I work through a lot more, whereas climbing is, I don't think about anything other than climbing and not dying, like when I'm climbing. So I like that aspect because I'm very present and focused, and working through fear, which it just blows me away that I can rock climb. Like, I literally was afraid to go on kind of a baby roller coaster at Disney about 8-9 years ago. So, and now I go on the upside down one. So I was like, this is so much easier than rock climbing. You don't have to worry about, maybe a rock will fall on me or whatever it is. There's no quality control in the mountains. So,
right.
So no. I can't, it's like comparing steak and, cake. I like them both, but they're so, you know what I mean? Like, I would rather have like one and then the other, not have to choose.
Hey, that's okay. I like that. I like that you kind of have a different purpose for both of them, and they both serve different things in your life. And so it's not a choosing what's your favorite. It's a choosing what do I need in this moment, maybe.
Right.
So talking about the outdoors, talk to us a little bit about how being in the outdoors plays a role specifically in your relationship with Christ.
Actually, so I was in a foster home and they were Christian, and I actually was in that foster home the longest period. So I was there between like 7 and 9, left, and then, or 7 and 8, and then left and came back, and was there until I was about almost 14, or maybe even, no, at 14. And we had a relationship later, but a lot of bad things happened there, not from the parents, but from, I had a foster brother who molested me. And then that just spiraled into a series of these awful traumatic events, including, hopefully this doesn't trigger somebody, but at 14 being gang raped and then not believed. And then I ran away to New York, all this stuff. It was like crazy. It was like, I tell people when they ask me, it's like Lifetime for Women story. It's so crazy. Like, and I just got really angry with God. I was like, and I just denied his existence completely. And, I experimented reading different religions, and called myself an atheist for a while, but then settled on agnostic. Like, I just don't believe in anything. And on a hike with my dog, I picked this one backpacking trip, which no one does. It's really hard to get to. It's in San Rafael Wilderness. And I still haven't gotten to the summit. It's like tricky. Like the trail's not maintained. It was like an obstacle course. I went over so many down trees. But I'm going with my dog, and we're going up. It's called Heartbreak Ridge, which really wasn't that bad. I was like, oh, come on. Like, this is just a hill. But I heard, and when was this? This was probably like this is right before the pandemic. So 2020. And it was about a week before everything shut down. And I heard this voice that said everything's going to be okay. And I was like, I stopped and I was like, first I was like, are you like, no, you're not going crazy. You actually heard that. And I was like, but why is this voice telling me this now? And is this God? Is it, and it just was really confusing. Like, I know everything's going to be okay. I'm on a hike. And I wasn't actually totally convinced right away. I ended up camping with my dog. We set up camp and then turned around because I realized like having a dog on that hike was not, I had to help. It's like carrying her over logs and stuff on top of myself. Yeah. And, I got home and I had a tick on me and I was like, oh no, because it was below 20 degrees there. I was like, I said to my husband, I didn't know ticks could live in that. She was literally like covered in them. So he gave her a tick bath. My husband tried to pick it off and the head was stuck in me. And so after having a stuck head in me, researched how to get it out of the dog. This little tick tornado it was called. And he got 30 live ticks off of her, attached ones. And wow. I went to test for Lyme disease. I guess you're supposed to. And I was just like, okay. And then she tested too, and she came back negative. And that a few days later, I tested positive for Lyme disease. And I was like, what? And then the pandemic was like there. And I was like, so I'm going to have this disease that's going to cause I couldn't really talk to anyone about it. The doctor was kind of just like, yeah, you have Lyme disease, like, have a nice day. And I was like, and I started Googling it and I was like, oh no, this is really bad. But then I thought everything's going to be okay. And I was just like, I kept thinking about that and I took a course of antibiotics, but then COVID hit and that really scared me. And, a lot of people it scared, but I just kept thinking everything's going to be okay. And finally that meant something. I still wasn't convinced, but I talked to my one Christian friend and she knows how to handle me and it's not being pushy. She's very skillful at it. And I knew she was, but it was helpful. And so the pandemic was in March, shutdown was in March and towards the end of April, I was like, I have to go out in the woods and took my dog and I went to the woods. Some people got upset about it. I was like, I'm not going to give literally no one COVID in the woods. I went somewhere really remote. I saw one person on trail. We just kind of turned away from each other, as you did back then. Like,
yeah.
And
don't make eye contact.
Yeah. And then I heard God spoke to me again. And then I knew, and I wrote it down and I talked to my friend about it. And I knew that it was God speaking to me. And so I was still a little bit like, wow, I'm going to just change my complete identity now. Like, and I actually have some guilt about this, not like, hey, thanks God for talking to me. Like, I'm like, oh no, now I'm going to have to like say I'm something else and look crazy. And then there was part of me like, why, people already think you're crazy. Like, why are you worried about that? And I think it was really hard for me because I do see Christians, being like people say really terrible things right now about them. And I think I was like, I've always had, I kind of came from this, drug addict, violent home, foster home, rejected, I had severe mental health disorder, which was highly stigmatized. And I was just like, I don't think I was being very brave. Like, I just didn't want, to deal with it. But and I had originally wanted to talk to you, and I backed out of fear. And recently when I was talking to my friend Benny, and I was like, you wimp, like what's up with you? You're like, you climb rocks to face your fear. You're going to be afraid of, what's someone going to say to me? You know what I mean? And if they do, I can totally handle it. So I'm very, I have a very sure sense of how God feels about me, but I haven't really been able to put that in. I'm very defensive of having a community yet. And I have met people like you and Benny and friends. I really kind of feel like some people are very, judgmental as Christians too. And they like, I need to kind of not be around them right now. Like, I want to be around the ones, that are like Christ, and Christ was not judgmental. And so, and I know that God's okay with where I'm at, especially since I agreed to do this. Like I kind of heard the wimp, and I'm kind of wondering if that was, God wouldn't call me a wimp, but you know what I mean? Like, me thinking like, what are you doing? This is not something, whenever I have a fear, like when I turned 50, somebody said I should jump out of an airplane, skydive. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And I was like, why? And I'm like, 'cause you're afraid. I'm like, oh no, that means I have to do it. And I'm like, why? You jumped out of an airplane. Like, you can, like, and I don't even know if my identity's changed. It just kind of went back to the person who didn't go through hell, I mean, a different kind of hell, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of went to this point when in my teen that I had really terrible PTSD, always nightmares, running away and from whatever monster human being who's chasing me. And, I can handle this. So, and God was, the fact that I'm alive. Oh, people have always commented, not even Christians. Everyone's like, I mean, I literally ran away to New York City when I was 15 years old, near a place called Hell's Kitchen. Like, and so I don't think it's a coincidence that I'm here. I mean, everything I did, like, I was pretty, I had attempted my life, but I was also very passively suicidal. Like, I would, drive like over 100 miles an hour on windy road. Like, everything I did was like, who cares if I die, And so
Yeah.
I don't think, I think God's been there all along. Like, not think, I know now. And I think he knew that I needed to hear something. And I'm actually trying really hard not to cry, because it's overwhelming, like, that love.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm still struggle with brokenness and, like unworthiness. And now I'm like, well, wait a minute, God thinks I'm awesome, And so why, how can I deny that?
Yeah. I think God shows up to different people in different ways. And I think in your situation, and I know I have a situation that's, a little bit, I'll say supernatural, or things that are hard to prove to somebody. I think that we can always shine some doubt on a situation, but it's like, it's such a miraculous and beautiful thing. And it just overtakes you in a way that you can't explain to anybody. And so it is really hard. And I totally understand what you're saying. As I walked into being a new Christian 5 years ago, like, I really wasn't super vocal about it until like the last year or so, because I had a lot of the same feelings that you had. And, I was atheist, agnostic, and all of the things. And so we have a very similar story in that way. And so it's like, yeah, now I'm a Christian, and people are going to be like, well, what the heck? You believe something different, last year, or that's not the person that I know. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Like, when you encounter Jesus, in a very supernatural way, like, your life does change, and it changes very quickly. And it is hard to explain to others. And it can sometimes even inside be hard to understand, And so I totally feel you on that front, but I'm so proud of you for being here and for stepping out and being brave and sharing, because I think that when God does things that are miraculous like this, the enemy tries to do everything to make it seem like it wasn't a big deal. And so I think that's why I encourage you so much. You need to share, there's so much power in your story, and, God is so capable of taking any story and redeeming it. And I think yours is a really beautiful one in that way. But I know that the enemy, just like he did to me, was like, nope, don't tell people about that, because God's going to get the glory and I want to keep you where I'm at. So yeah. Anyways, I'm just proud of you. Because I know it's taken a little bit of encouragement, but I know you have a really cool story, so I'm excited for everyone to hear it. But can you share, before we jump into kind of the main section, can you share, I know you had this, kind of miraculous experience with God on a mountain and live in and get to travel and do all of these things in some really cool places, but what are some ways that people can maybe encounter God through creation, even if they live in a bigger city, without going and being on these, major hikes or being alone with your dog in the woods?
Well, I think, I mean, during the week I do work. I have some people who snarkily ask me if I do. And so it's important for me, dogs, getting them, we have 2 parks. One I like better because I can let her off leash without people telling me she needs to be on leash. Mika's very energetic in the morning, and so she likes to sprint, and that's an important part of my day too, to start off being outdoors. But it made me think that question. I did exposure therapy to that time in New York City, and when I was younger with a therapist, and this is, I think, 2019. And so I went and walked in these areas where these bad things happened. And while I was there, and I never went to Central Park. New York City was to purchase drugs. That was it. And so I was like, oh, I'll do a 9-mile hike in Central Park. And I was amazed how beautiful that place was. Parts of it reminded me, I'm a Lord of the Rings nerd, big time. And part of it reminded me of Rivendell, just some of the design of some of the outdoor seating and stuff. So, and I mean, even in New York City, I felt, just being, next to trees and water and flowers and even some little animals, So, yeah. I think it just being outside. I mean, most places have, not everything has accessible areas, but for the most part, I think most people can have some access. So
yeah. Finding those little oases, even in a big city.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. I love it. Okay. So jumping into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory. I know you've shared kind of a little bit about it already, but would love for you to share a little bit more in detail about a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced in your life, and just what God maybe taught you or prepared you for in that season.
So, from the get-go, both my parents were addicts. My dad was abusive to my mother, and my grandmother, and I don't remember her. She died when I was 2.5, but I've always known there was something better. And I think she raised me while my mom was off doing, partying and stuff like that. And she died when I was 2.5, which, even though I don't remember it, had to be very traumatic, since she was essentially my mom, and then my mom couldn't take care of us. We ended up in foster care. I have an older brother, and back and forth. And most foster homes, this was in New Jersey, were terrible. I mean, I had some boys when I was 8, tie me up in the woods. And they said when my mom came, they were going to leave me there. And so I got up really early and sat on the curb the day my mom came, terrified these boys were going to come out. But I ended up in this Christian foster home, and I really attached to my foster mother. she could actually, it was very traumatic when my mother, the time I remember her putting me into foster care. And for years, I was angry, and I went through therapy not that long ago for it. And I was actually very scared and terrified and thought something was wrong, like with me, like why I'm a bad kid. And I mean, and so I was pretty broken at this foster home, but she knew how to kind of, um, some comfort, and I felt loved and cared for. And, I went to Christian church. I ended up going, she started a Christian school and I ended up going there. And I went to this Christian camp, which I loved every year. And so I really, like, towards that time, started to feel closer to God and okay. And something bad was happening in the home. And I internalized it that I was the one wrong, but it was an older brother. Like, I was, much younger, like 8, 9, and he was 17, 18. And when puberty hit, I was like, all of a sudden, I mean, it was crazy. Like, I was just in this constant rage. Like, I just hated the world. I mean, everything. I remember I went through an ugly phase when I was 12. And I think I actually told my husband that, and he's like, no. And I found a picture. He's like, that's you. Like, but people were mean to me because I was ugly. And I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, I couldn't help what was going on. Like, that I could wash my hair 10 times and it was still crazy. Like, and then I was, gang raped, and I was treated as a bad girl. Like, I mean, I acted pretty bad, but no one ever thought, why would she do this? What's wrong with her? And so all these series of traumatic events happen. I run away to New York City, and, I was trafficked and became addicted to crack right in line with the whole New York City crack epidemic in 1986. Like, I remember seeing the headlines, and I really thought I was going to die. They're selling newspapers, but they're like, crack addicts aren't going to live. But for me, with such a teenage brain, like, that's all I wanted to do. I was going to do it until I died. And I had a near death. Someone threatened my life with a knife to my throat after me running for blocks, which is why I used to have nightmares of, someone chasing me, because I had clear PTSD. Probably had PTSD before, but the abandonment and stuff, but that one was very clear cut. I had my head cracked open. I spent time in New York City jail after a police officer pointed a gun at me for smoking crack on the street, but some more PTSD, but I lied and said I was adult. So I went through the whole New York City jail system. But at the end, my mother actually came to get me, and they locked me up. That was the only way. I climbed out of windows and stuff. So this time they put me in a detention center, and they're like, you're not going anywhere. And it was very, very difficult coming. I had intense cravings, and I wasn't supposed to live. So all this stuff that happened to me was really, really terrible. And, it just kept trauma after trauma. And some of it was, none of that was my own doing, but then I would put myself in these situations, and I never asked for it. No one ever does, but it was just one after another. And that's when I just started getting like, God doesn't exist. He wouldn't do this to me. And I blamed God. And I think, how that translates today, first of all, that I had an experience with God. I mean, to know that it was God while I was in the mountains, but also, that I'm pretty, I don't say this in I'm awesome way, but I'm pretty happy with who I am. I'm happy that, even some of the more difficult sides of me, I mean, I'm pretty picky with people and stuff. And I've kind of decided that that's okay too, and I don't have to be quite as mean about it as when I was younger, but how I'm actually working on a book right now about that experience, because I've had clients really respond to the fact that I'm a therapist, and especially some of the sexual stuff, trauma, impacts people and who they are. Like I felt dirty and disgusting and like, but if I were asked to do it all over again, I would. Like I going through all that made me who I am. And we're like on the trail being stinky and doing these things that like not everyone does stuff like that. And doing hard stuff. I think it's really important to me. And I don't judge people, but I wouldn't want to be somebody just kind of comfortable in life, and all those experiences set me up to deal with being uncomfortable. And I feel really good when I face things that are very uncomfortable. So I think everything that happened to me like had to happen for me to be who I am today.
Yeah. Well, thank you, one, for sharing all of that and for opening up about some of those things. I know that those can all be very traumatic things and very hard things to talk about, but I know that you are on the other side of a lot of those things now. And I think that it's interesting how you've taken all of those experiences as well, and now you're helping people in some of those same experiences. And so it has now become, your job to help other people with some of the same things that you struggled with. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got to that place of like taking your pain and what you've been through into the transition to you want to help people in that same situation.
I think that I really had a hard road trying to find help. Like I've tried multiple therapists. I think part of my, I talk about being stubborn, and it's part of it was a gift. I mean, if I believed what people, when I was 20, I attempted suicide and I ended up in a hospital, and they diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder. And I was encouraged to go on disability. And I was like, I didn't like come out of hell to just like, I would rather be dead than nothing wrong with disability. But for me, it was like, that couldn't be my life. Like it could not. And so, and again, if I couldn't, maybe things would be different, but I knew like that was not how I wanted my life to be.
Yeah.
And I think I listened to some therapists. I did my own thing. I ended up actually joining the Army Reserves in my late 20s. And that was actually pretty good therapy to me. I don't recommend it for everyone, but I realized I was capable. If I could do these things when this man is literally screaming at me, then I can do them on my own. And I learned how to become more motivated. And I was always overwhelmed, behind and stuff like that. Like literally, no high school diploma, and then, figuring things out. My current husband had to teach me algebra so that I could get the bachelor's that I got before a master's degree. So it was hard for me too. I had a hard time. I also have ADHD, so it was hard for me to concentrate. And I think that frustration, that road, I mean, I could see if I had someone that does the therapy I do, maybe I could have had, 15, 20 more years of my life, that I wasn't severely depressed. I mean, there's periods of time, like in my 30s, I couldn't get out of bed, like, for maybe that's why I don't mind being on trail and dirty, because I was pretty dirty then too. But, and what helped me get better in those times? Well, one of them was I had a friend, very dear friend, taking care of me, and when I had no family, and I decided I could not end my life in this person's house as a way to say thank you, And so the answer was I got to get up. And I see so many therapists afraid to say stuff like that, or people kind of fragilizing yourself. I didn't get out of bed for like, a month, and I had to get up, and it was hard, and it was gradual. It's not like I got up and all of a sudden I felt better. I had to keep pushing myself. And I see most of the clients that come to me have been through therapies that don't work. And again, dialectical means a synthesis of two opposing views. So we're trying to make somebody feel like, okay, you're human, you're worthy, and let's stop doing these destructive things, and let me push you to do those destructive things, which requires a very good, authentic relationship. I'm not always nice. I'll tell you that, but I'm always caring. And they know that whatever I'm doing, it is to help them, and so I think that's, I just kind of was drawn towards doing, I just decided one day I wanted to help people. And I also thought that it was kind of, I don't want to say my penance, but I did even on that road, I did some things that weren't great when I was younger. And I kind of felt like I needed to do something that was hard for me. And there are definitely easier ways for me to make a living. It's hard for me, and when it's satisfying, it's very satisfying,
Yeah.
of course. But sometimes some people, I fail too. I mean, I'm human as a therapist as well.
Yeah.
It was pretty interesting because I was getting a degree in computer information systems. I had an associate's and I was kind of in that field a bit. And I'm going to switch to psychology. And it was like another one of those things where people are like, what? Like, you're just changed your mind one day. And sometimes I'm like that. I know what I want to do. And it's like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so it's just a very innate thing to do. But in the process of when I decided that, I was still kind of a mess. And I was like, well, you need to fix yourself before you do that. And I really worked hard to change a lot of problem behaviors. And, I went through pretty difficult PTSD treatment for years. I stopped probably like 4 or 5 years ago, but depression, I learned how to really not let it just take control of me anymore, and that's an important component of it. It doesn't have to be your master. And there's a big controversy out there. There are things you could do to learn. Like I might feel like staying in bed, but I know that it's not like a cold. It's not going to help my immune system attack the depression. Like it's actually going to make me feel worse because now I'm calling in sick to work. And, I tell my clients, like, staying home in bed is not a mental health day. Now, if you called in sick to work to go to the beach or get a massage or, go to Disneyland, we'll call that a mental health day. But what they end up doing is staying in bed thinking about how miserable they are. And there's that you get stuck in that. And I've been stuck in that. So, and, everyone has different opinions about it. I know what works for me and I know what's worked with the people I've worked with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I love that you said, that you can say to some people like, get up, like, you can kind of give them that real life, like gut check, in a way, I guess is what I'm trying to say of like, no, you are capable, like get up. And just like that will be the start of it. And I think, that parallels a lot with, I think, scripture and the way in which like God calls us to turn and, to move forward in certain situations. And it takes effort on our part, right? Like we have to be the one to do it. And sometimes things in life feel really good, but that doesn't mean that they're good for us. And
right.
I think it's cool that in your line of work, you can do that because I think that a lot of people would think that that's insensitive. And it's like, no. Now, if you really need to be in bed for some reason, be in bed, but you're not going to get better if you don't get up. So get up,
Right.
And embrace the hard things. And what you were saying earlier, like you have been through so many hard things and that's why you enjoy doing hard things today. And, me and Meg were talking recently after doing the JMT about like, there is beauty in doing the hard things because it prepares us for hard things in the future. And we can handle harder things if we purposefully put ourselves through hard things, like hiking or climbing or, those kinds of more physical things. But I find it easier to say in my brain, oh no, I can make it through this. Like if I know I've made it through hard things in the past. And so I think there's definitely a beauty to that. So for somebody who maybe is in a season of life of kind of blaming God for a really hard life and for maybe a lot of traumatic, instances like you were, and maybe saying, there's probably not a God because how could he let all of these things happen to me? What advice or word of encouragement maybe would you provide to someone who can't see through that tunnel?
I think I would say that I had no way of knowing what would come out on the other side, and they don't either. Like you don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes we have to use the JMT towards the end. I actually lost so much weight. I had hair fall out, like probably like 1/3 of my hair. It's like a little wimpy little braid. And towards the end, my legs were really heavy when I was going up the last couple passes. And I'm just like, just keep walking. I kind of think of me younger. I would have just maybe threw a temper tantrum, which would have done absolutely nothing, made a fool of me, or stopped. It's kind of like, just keep going. Sometimes it's just keep going, just be present. And I think, that you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what the purpose of this. And like, I had no idea, like went through all this trauma, that I never thought that I would be, I don't like to say happy, but somebody who wants to be here, in type of therapy I do, we call it a life worth living. I have a life worth living. But I had to create that life worth living. And I had to take some accountability, even though I wasn't the one who asked for it. I was the one who needed to start making the changes. Like I was stuck with blame. And if I stayed in that direction, I would probably be not here, when I realized, I call it an epiphany, but now I wonder if God put that in my brain that you have to be the one to change your life. Like, even though these bad things happen, I thought I was owed something. Like, was the state of New Jersey going to give me like, here's a sum of money? Like, what was I owed? Like, and, some acknowledgement that I've received from people who have harmed me, not much, but that was helpful. But most of them, you don't get any, and they don't have any space in my head anymore, And so I think that there's more to this story, than what you're dealing with now, but you just can't see it.
Yeah. I like that. You just got to keep moving forward, because we can come up with all of these worst case scenarios as to what's going to happen with all of it, or, that life's just going to stay the same, or, X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you just never know what's going to be on the other side.
Favorite Bible verse is, and sometimes when I climbed Mount Whitney, I started saying this in my head because I literally started to have a panic attack when I looked down at the 1,000-foot drop. And is Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for I'm with you and I'm the Lord your God. And I remember that because I still struggle. Like I'm not like, I don't view mental health issues as like, I'm cured, but yeah. I still have to work through stuff. Like I still have things that, I don't often use the word trigger, but just kind of, it's probably the easiest word to use in these situations that I have to work through. Yeah. And I think of that verse, like, it's not like even a mere suggestion, it's a commandment. So, and that really helps me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for leaving us with that. I think that's beautiful and plays a huge role in everything that we've talked about. I just want to say again, thank you so much for sharing and for being willing to be vulnerable and sharing the hard things and sharing your faith, most importantly, because I know that's probably the biggest thing here that's hard for you at this point in your life. But just want to say thank you so much for that, and would love for you to share with the listeners just where they can find you or connect with you.
I mean, I'm Tara Rubino Myers on Instagram. I have my own practice called Center for Evidence-Based Treatment. So it's Center for FOREBT.com, Tara at centerforebt.com. I mean, any way someone wants to reach out to me. I actually get a lot of inquiries for therapy, and I'm not taking anyone right now, but I really do try my best to at least point them in the right direction and stuff. So I take time out. I'm never too busy for stuff like that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you just again for sharing and for being here.
Thank you again for having me. It's good seeing you too.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.